Hi, Bitahnii. It's been great, just really, really great getting to know you this past week at Sundance and having you drive around your beautiful land. So I'm just here, I'm here to listen, which is how I arrived. I'm still listening. And yeah, anything that you care to share um, to the people, just go for it.
Okay, ja det she Bitahnii shledo to ye linie da shja. To de genie da shchero tsna genie da shnale. Ale tisi ade she ya do Wayne Wilson da shjnende. Oh you Wayne Wilson da halonde. Bitahnii Wayne Wilson kat da shjneka. Jo Bitahnii shlom benache. Hello, everyone. I'm Folded Arms. Folded Arms clan, born for the two waters that flowed together's clan, and Bitter Water is my maternal grandparent, and Black Street on the Running Tree clan is my paternal grandparent. And my name is Wayne Wilson. But I go by Bitahnii Wayne Wilson because there are so many Wayne Wilsons out there. So I decided to use Bitahnii as my name because as my indigenous name for my clan. So that's who I am. Um, but I was born in Fort Defiance, Arizona, and I was raised, grew up in Navajo, New Mexico, where my mom and my dad lived in the housing there, and my father worked at the sawmill in there in Navajo when the sawmill was running at that time, back in the 70s, and so. Um, but then I had a lot of I guess in a way I was born into a family that not knowing that they had some issues and some problems that kind of extended from the past, dealing with traumatic events that had happened to our people and then also to our family. So like my family were affected by alcoholism and domestic violence. I grew up that way with my mother and my father drinking, and then they would fight and argue, and so I went through this whole process of alcoholism, and seeing my mother and my father, we had to be in the parking lot till wee hours of the night, and then coming out and then driving home and going kind of swerving, not knowing, as a child, not knowing what really was going on. So anyway, we eventually we ended up in an accident, and um, two accidents, but the last accident was the straw that broke the camel's back for our family, because my mother had went through the window shield, and she had was scarred for the rest of her life across her face, and and then my grandmother decided, she said, that's, no more, no, we don't want this, so they kind of split up, and so there was a split in our family. My father went on his own, and my mother was dealing with her trauma. It was just trauma in general. So what I'm trying to get at with all this is, and there are many families out there, whether indigenous or non-indigenous, we are affected by trauma, and we carry this trauma. Like for me, I'm dealing with intergenerational trauma. So this trauma has affected me, and it takes a while for us to identify. It was just a lot of confusion on my mind, and I couldn't. I guess you could say I couldn't really understand what it was. I couldn't. Trauma. You can't see it, but you experience it in many ways in your life that affect you, psychologically in your brain, and all this chemistry happening. It affects you, and you carry it with you, and we relive it over and over and over and over to the point that we start manifesting this whole trauma and traumatic feelings within ourselves, and then it extends into our relatives, our family, friends. Um, in a way, what I'm sharing with you is trying to get to this healing process of dealing with trauma. And like for me, I had to go really look into um, myself, and then look into my family. So when I'm talking about trauma or intergenerational trauma, it has to do with what had happened with the Navajos or Dine'h people, and how they were affected, generations that are affected through. We went through the Long Walk um, in the 1800s that affected many families, and are still dealing. Some families out there still living that trauma, and it's affecting them. So, so for my family, I had a grandmother that went on the Long Walk and survived it and came back and married my grandfather, who is also he was part of the surviving, and I guess I'd say a resistance to this. So they reunited and got together, and so that's how I ended up eventually coming about. So, but I'm originally I guess you could say my bloodline and my clan comes from Chief Manuelito. Um, some call him Haskin Jin or Aka Bije, which is his name is I guess it has to do with the black plant that comes out, and then also Bullet was his name. So he was affected. He had to surrender and come in right into Santa Fe and surrender himself for the sake of the people. So and then at the same time, he was affected by this whole trauma by his sons. Two of his sons went to boarding school. One died there in Carlisle boarding school, and the other one came home but died because of tuberculosis. And so, and then eventually he was affected by pneumonia, and that's how he passed away too. So, but at the same time, like going back to my grandmother and my grandfather and how they were affected through boarding school, this whole boarding school era, and how boarding school has affected this my grandparents, and then my mother and my father, and then me. Um, my mother and my father, they met at Intermountain Boarding School in Ogden, Utah, or in Utah, near Salt Lake, and then then when I have I have one brother and one sister, and then there's me. I'm the youngest in the family, and so this whole thing with boarding school has affected me, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, how they had to play this role into being the intermediary between the indigenous population or indigenous people with the communities, and then also with the government. So um, when I went to boarding school, BIA boarding school, I went to Pine Springs boarding school, and then I also went to Fort Wingate boarding school. And in the boarding school, I've experienced a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of intimidation, bullying, both from the students that we grew up or we're in the dorm with, and then also the dorm attendants, and so it's this whole thing of trauma, and that's what the main topic is: how do we heal from trauma? How are we gonna how can we heal generations and learn not to do these things again? And one of the main things when I also when I was before I went to boarding school was my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather was named as John Burnside, and he was a medicine man, and he was the medicine man, one of the medicine men of the community of Pine Springs. There were several, but he was one of the main ones. But I do remember helping clean the hogan, taking the bedrolls out, taking the furniture out to prepare for ceremony, and then gathering the firewood, the water, the food, whether the sheep need to be butchered, for the sacrifice of the sheep, which was, we had to sacrifice. And I always felt bad because, here we're taking the life of a sheep, but then the sheep was the meat, the flesh that we eat from the sheep is going to be supporting the ceremony for the sake of a patient who needs to be healed from whatever ailments. But at the same time, I listened to my grandfather, and I was under the table, listened to everything he was saying in Navajo, and because that's all he spoke was Navajo. And for me, I do recognize that I'm a limited English proficient person, limited English proficiency, meaning Navajo was my first language and English was my second language. So some people call it as English as a second language, ESL. So there's these programs. I got caught up in this whole thing with that issue, and that has stunted some of my learning as far as learning education and coming up with these my terminology and having a hard time with education. I tried going to college. I went to school in Michigan. Went to Mott Community College, and then also went to Lansing Community College, and I went to Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and but I learned a lot. So the reason why I'm jumping around is because I kind of give you a better understanding of who I am, and how I've learned about ceremony, and through my grandfather and how he explained, a lot of the information. And now it's at this age that I am. I'm 53. I was born in 1968, so I had to go learn through different methods of meditation, and try to go back into my own DNA, and try to retrieve the information of what my grandfathers told me and shared with me about ceremony, and about our spirituality, the fact that we have our own spirituality. There's a lot of churches and denominations that are out there, learning that it's a set of doctrines to go by, but at the same time, I've identified some of these same rules and regulations and code of ethics that are in our own traditional teachings that are pretty much the same. They reflect. So everything goes back to the Great Spirit, goes back to Dine'h God, or Dine'h, which means the Holy of Holy, or Dine'h, which is the wind spirit, the whole. Some say Holy Ghost, or we say Holy Wind. So there's specific ways of how we say that, and to say it in a reverent way, alilik echo, jo alilik echo be citizeno, and you pray in a holy way, and to keep to find your balance, and to find that sense of peace and longing, and gratitude, and just being content within yourself, that you have this. You don't need anything like substance abuse, drinking alcohol to cover up or to enhance. You just need your own individual self to be your own authentic self. You have all these different ceremonies. You have all these different denominations. Some ceremonies have become extinct because there's no one there to learn it. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you a little bit of brief of who I am and what I do. I pray. I practice Qigong. I practice Tai Chi, meditation, acupuncture. Now I'm going through CMBM, which is Center for Mind Body Medicine, in dealing with trauma. So I'm trying to incorporate that with the traditional Navajo chants, prayers, also like sun dance, any type of indigenous spirituality, because all spirituality is pretty much, when it comes down to it, it's all the same. It's all one the same. It's like the air. We can't see it, but we can breathe it, but we need it to live. So with that type, we have to constantly keep moving, and I think that's part of it, is that holy movement of living in harmony with everything, with the four directions, Mother Earth, Father Sky, and everything in between, and then also all the way out into the universe, because that's who we are, and they are our relatives. Everything, the elements are all our relatives, the plants, the trees, the animals, and that's the only way we're going to live in harmony to survive. If we don't, then we won't cease to exist. So that's kind of how I look at all in a nutshell.
Nice.
So,
Beautiful. Thanks.
so thank you for hearing me.
Yeah. Well, it's great listening to you. And there's so many beautiful things that you said, and so many different individual topics to spend more time on and elaborate. So anyway, thank you, Bitahnii, and I'm looking forward to more. I know we all are. Bye for now.